Yeah, hi, good morning guys. Mike here at Global Investments. Saturday morning, and I thought I'd just do a little bit of a chat this morning on what questions investors should really ask themselves before they decide to plunge into the US property market. So kind of my tips and what questions I think you should ask yourself and look into, the research that you should do before you actually buy, So the first one in my opinion would be, which company do you buy from? Hopefully it's us, obviously. However, I do think it's a really good question that you have to look for, because I think you need to try and build a relationship with that company, because hopefully moving forward, well, number one, you're going to take their advice and guidance on which markets to look for, which neighborhoods to look for, and you're going to kind of trust their knowledge of the market. So I think you need to look at the company's history, their track record, what they've done, what areas they've sold in, and so on. So I think you should always look to speak to somebody. I think a lot of people make the mistake sometimes of dealing with companies via email, via WhatsApp, and I'm not saying email or WhatsApp is not good, because I think it's great to start off that relationship. But I think you should always, if I'm going to buy a property off somebody, I want to meet them. Do you know what I mean? So, and there's so many ways now that we can meet people. We can meet people on Teams. The old Skype is still around, and Zoom or FaceTime video call. But I think it's always nice to put a face to the name, and almost like having a meeting in an office, So I think that's really important. So that would be my first point. The second point with the US would be which state I should buy in. And this is a really hard one, because I think it comes down to personal choice sometimes as an individual, and all of the areas that we sell in really offer decent returns, good appreciation, some more than others. I guess what the investor really needs to decide, and what, as a client, what you need to decide is what's more important. Is it the net return, like cash flow, or is it growth, or is it in some cases getting a balance of both? My advice would probably be to look at all of the options before making a decision. So you look at, right now, our best-selling markets would be Cleveland, Ohio, and Detroit. So you'd look at, and I've done a couple of videos on the difference between the two. And I think when you look at the different markets, one market might give you, for example, Cleveland, more growth, higher cash flow, where Detroit might give you more stability, more established market, but not necessarily as much growth. So I think which state that you buy in, or which city that you buy in, it really depends on, number one, how adverse you are to risk, or number two, what exactly is it you're looking for from your investment? What is more important to you as an investor? So that would be my second point. So I think those first two really, really important. Another question that I think you should always ask, and it's a question that comes up a lot when I speak to clients, would be, should I buy in my own name, or should I buy in a company name? So I think for the first time investor, so somebody just buying their first property, initially it's probably best to buy it in your own name. And later, if we want to, we can always open an LLC and transfer the ownership from your own name to the company name. However, if you are looking at potentially buying, 2, 3, 4, even more houses, and building a small portfolio in the US, then definitely 100%. From a tax perspective, you should set up an LLC, and you go down as a director of the LLC, and the LLC buys the property. So that would be the best way to do that. Also, just one other thing as well, with Section 8, if you're looking at buying a Section 8 property, you have to have an LLC, because the city or the state will not pay anything other than a US entity. So you have to have an LLC if you want to go down the Section 8 route. Okay. Who does that for you? We work with a really good guy that I've worked with for coming up to, I think, 12 years now, Richard, who owns the Sharp law firm. He's based out of Michigan. He can set up your LLC, do your tax returns, get your ITIN number, basically everything that's needed. The cost to do all of that is around about, I think it's like $1,000. That's for the LLC, the bank account, and your ITIN number. And I think Richard actually gives you your first year's tax return included in that as well. But you need to check that with Richard. So that would be my third point. Number 4, should I buy a vacant or a tenanted property? So really good question, and it comes up a lot, you know. But I think both options are good. But again, I think it comes down to personal choice. I think buying a tenanted house is great because it gives you income from day one. But the buyer should ensure, or you as an investor, you have to ensure that the due diligence has been done on the lease agreements, the tenant's history, and so on. So as a company, before you close on a property, if it's tenanted, John and his team, Michael, would request the tenant's details, the lease agreements, rent history, and we would also always ensure that you get paid a security deposit and prorated rent on closing. So if any of that's, we find anything wrong with that, we would recommend we look for a different property. On the other hand, I do speak to a lot of investors that like to buy a vacant, refurbished house, so then they can have an involvement with the management company on placing a tenant, which I think is a really good thing, because I think, you know, these are mid to long-term investments, so they're 5-10-year investments. So if it takes you 2 or 3 months to place a really good tenant, then so be it, you know. I mean, the whole idea is that you want to try and get a tenant in place that's going to stay in the property for 5 to 10 years, or 2 or 3 years, but a long-term, a long-term tenant. And I think, you know, saying no to some tenants is a good thing. So if you buy a vacant property, I don't think there's any harm. Don't rush to place a tenant. Don't rush the management company to place a tenant. You know, make sure they place the right tenant. And if it takes a few months to do that, then so be it. Like I said, you know, I think they're good long-term investments. And if you get a tenant stays in there for 3 or 4 years or even longer, which we see sometimes, then fantastic, you know. But as a company, we offer vacant, refurbished, and also tenanted properties as well. So, but again, I think it comes down to the individual, the investor, and what their preference is, you know. So I think that's a good point as well. What else do we have? Can I have an inspection survey? So I think this is probably the biggest question a buyer should be asking before you buy a house. And you should never buy a house unless you see a full survey, full inspection on the property, where we check the main fundamental items, the roof, the plumbing, the foundations, the electrics. We also check for structural movement as well, which is really important. And I think also another point as well, I think the contract that you sign should be always subject to an inspection. Like all of our contracts, anything you sign with us as a company is subject to the inspection. So if you don't like the property, you don't like the inspection, we cancel, you don't lose any money, and you can transfer those funds to an alternative property. So everything is done subject to the survey and subject to the inspection. So I think that's a really, really important one. Next one, I would probably say, should I buy a Section 8 or a private tenant? Should I buy a house? Is it important? And I think I did a video a few weeks ago on this, basically explaining you're not buying a tenant, you're buying a house. And I think it all comes down to management. I think the bottom line is, if you're working with a good management company, and they do their due diligence, their vetting, credit checks, criminal checks, previous landlord history. All of those things are done correctly. It shouldn't really make a difference whether you place a Section 8 tenant or place a private tenant. However, I think Section 8 pay a little bit more than private tenants, so that's something to take into consideration. But remember, any property can be made Section 8. So you might buy a house with a private tenant in place, the tenant leaves, and then at a later date, if you want to, you can actually make the property Section 8. So I think that the most important question, which is, again, I've done on other videos, would be the location of the property comes first all the time. So I think I wouldn't get hung up on the fact, is it Section 8 or is it private? And because again, you are not buying a tenant, you're buying the house. So I hope that covers that one. Another one here, can I have a US account for my rental income? Okay, so this is one of the biggest questions I think as a company we probably get asked. Mike, can we get a US account? And is it easy to do that? So in relation to a private tenant, if you've got a private tenant in your property, it doesn't really matter because the management company will send your rents abroad. So they could send it to the UK, to France, to Sweden, to South America, wherever you want. So it doesn't really matter. And the managing agent would have an escrow account which they keep their funds in, and then you can tell them, sometimes you might do it monthly or quarterly or biannually, and it doesn't really matter. But I mean, the bottom line is if you open a LLC or a company, then I think it's important that you do have a US account. And of course, if you're going down the Section 8 route, then you should have a US account. So it's dead easy. It's very difficult to open a personal account for yourself unless you're actually present in the US and you walk into the bank with your passport. However, we can open Richard again can help open a bank account in the US with you, or you have companies like Wise, which is excellent, Mercury, very good, and all you do is you upload your LLC documentation, your incorporated documents into the system, and I think they open up an account within like 24, 48 hours. You have your account number. So yeah, 100%. I think, and I think if you're buying in the US, then yeah, I think it's a good idea. Keep the funds in US dollars. Wise is great, fantastic company, and keep your money in US dollars, and then you can watch the exchange rate as well and make sure you're not losing money when you bring your money back to whichever country you're bringing the funds back with. Or sometimes I have clients that buy a house with the funds, their rental income, so they collect their rental income and then buy another property, so then the money never comes out of the US, and they use those funds, the rental income, to invest again, which I think is a clever idea as well, So yeah, 100%. I think you should look down, or certainly it's certainly a question you should ask yourself: do I need a US account, and how will I do it? Next one would be, who will manage my property when I'm so far away? A really good question as well, and I think I've done a lot of videos on this, on management and the importance of management, and I think, in my opinion, management is key to these types of investments working, 100%. And I think, and I've said it many times, you can buy a great house in a great location, but if it's managed badly, it can turn into a bad investment. So I think the management side is as important as the property that you buy. So ensure, whoever you're dealing with, whether it's with us or any other company, ensure that they've had, the management companies that we're working with, I've had a lot of experience, many years. They know that they've got good knowledge. Again, like you would check my track history. We've been in business 12 years. We've sold 6,500 properties. The same with the management company. How many doors do they manage? How many years have they been in business? Even ask for a call with them if you want. We can always set up a call with any of the management companies that we work with. So if you wanted to do that, that's no issue as well, So we set up a Zoom call or a WhatsApp call. So again, the management part is vital, Another question that comes up quite a lot, and I think it's a good one, not one for me to answer because I'm not a tax advisor, but do I need to pay income tax? It's funny, some people ask it and some people don't ask it, but the answer is yes, you do need to pay income tax, of course you do, because it's an income. However, I would probably recommend, because obviously every client, every investor is different in the way that they do their tax returns, where they're based, if they're in Singapore, Dubai, South America, Switzerland. So there's a lot of different aspects that would come into this. So my advice, like I said, I'm not a tax advisor. I can tell you how to buy a property and how to invest in property. But the best person to speak to would be an accountant. So my advice would be that you ask whoever you're dealing with, whether it's Barry, whether it's Scott, Marcella, Gocken, Ian, ask them to put you in touch with Richard. Like I said, Richard's a really good guy. I worked with him for a lot of years, and I have a call with Richard, and he would tell you the best way to set it up for you and your family in the most tax efficient way, especially if you're looking at building a portfolio of properties, you know. So I think that's a really important point as well, and it is a question that comes up a lot, you know, and nobody likes paying tax, but the answer to the question is yes, you need to pay your tax, you know, unfortunately. The last one really that I would say, I think that is 10, I'm not sure, I'll have a look in a second. Who will insure my property, and what insurance should I take out? So we have, as you know, we have an after sales department which is headed by Michael and his team. So when you close on the property, you'll be given a few different options. So my advice, we work with a great company in Detroit called Stateside, who do a great job for us. They're kind of like an administration company for overseas and some domestic clients as well. But they do a fantastic job, and the reason that we use them is they get the cheapest insurance quotes. So normally on a single family, you'd be looking at anything from, I think, $500, $600, maximum $700. And on a duplex, you'd be looking at maybe, I don't know, anything from $700 up to $1,000 a year, so annually. But again, my advice would be to take, there's a lot of different insurances that you can take. Speak to Michael, speak to his team. Again, have a Zoom call, have a Skype call, have a FaceTime call, and have a meeting on what is the best insurance that you should take. My advice, always take the comprehensive insurance, which also covers you for public liability as well, which obviously in the US is very important, you know. So I mean, I could go on, but I, like I said, in a lot of those points, I think each individual investor is different and would have different questions. But I think all of those points that I've covered there are really important and are questions that I think as an investor you should definitely be asking yourself before you make the decision to invest. Because I think a lot of people do it back to front, and they look at the properties first before asking all of these questions, and it's kind of done back to front, because you find a property that you like, but you haven't answered all of your questions, so you can't really move on the property because there's still a lot of unanswered questions that you have. So I think they would be my top 10 tips. I apologize if there's not 10, but I think there is. Let me just check now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, there's 10 there. So I hope that helps. And if you're looking at buying a house, run through them, go through the questions, ask yourself these questions, make sure you've had the right calls with people. And we've got teams on the ground, South America, Turkey, Canada, Farouk in Canada, that can meet you, can have a Zoom call with you, can have a Skype call with you, and have a meeting. I'm available as well, so if you want a Zoom call with me, ask Marcella, Scott, Barry, John, Ian, Gocken, and I can jump on a call with you as well. But listen, Saturday I'm going to go and watch a bit of football now. You guys have a good weekend. Speak soon.